You're listening to the Kennel Confidential podcast brought to you by the United Tree and Feist Association. I'm your host, Davin Ramage.
I'm your co-host, Ed Wagler.
Let's get into the episode. Hello again, podcast listeners. We are getting ready to start again on yet another episode of the Kennel Confidential podcast. This week, you get just me and Chad. We're going to take a little walk down memory lane and see if we can get a good history lesson on some Boggs Creek blood, Poor Fork blood. Chad's going to give us the education on that because he is the man who knows it. How you doing tonight, Chad?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Pretty good. I don't know if I know a lot of it, but I'll at least make it up as we go if I need to.
Make it sound good.
Yeah.
Well, it's different. We hadn't done just me and you, I guess, since the very first one, so I don't have to ask you who you are, where you're from, or what you're hunting. We already know that.
Well, I know we'd had a couple of people ask us to do some episodes and get back into some of the history of some of the lines of dogs, and I know we did Todd Coles with the booster line, and we've got a couple other breeder spotlights, I guess as we call them, scheduled or attempting to schedule. Some guys are getting older and they really don't want to come on a podcast and talk about it, but I guess we just thought we would get it started with Boggs Creek and Poor Fork, and I've been fortunate enough to meet Ed and Wagler and Ed Wilder and Jason Wagler. So, and I've sat down and talked to them pretty extensively about all this. So, figured we'd try to put some of my knowledge to the test, I guess.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Like I told you, I dug through some of your posts on the Boggs Creek Poor Fork Facebook page, and to somebody like me who knows nothing about it, I will say that you definitely know something about it. If not, you make it sound good because I believe it. So I'm interested in it. I'm excited about it. Me and you have talked about them off and on here and there, but I recognize the names, but I don't really know the dogs or the people or anything more than what I read on those posts. So I'm looking forward to it and hoping to hear something new tonight.
Yeah, I hope I can say something new.
To get started then, let's just highlight a little bit on Mr. Ed Wagler. That's who Bill started with, right?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, we lost Ed a few months ago. He had a buggy accident, and he didn't make it through it. So talked to a couple of the family, and, we hated to lose him.
Yeah, I hate to hear that. So I guess just for clarification on that point too, Mr. Wagler was an Amish gentleman.
Yes, all these dogs originated from the Amish community in Lagodi, Indiana. Everybody speculates what kind of dogs was this and that, and most up there was farm dogs, and probably real heavy on the fox terrier influence. That's kind of what Bill looked like, but yes, is a pretty good size Amish community up there, and that's where all these dogs originated from.
So Ed Wagler got Bill was given to him, right?
Well, yes and no. See, Boggs Creek Bill, who we know as Poor Fork Bill, we'll get into that a little later, was actually the second Boggs Creek Bill. Ed had a dog named Boggs Creek Bill some years before, and of course they hunted off buggy and stuff, and I guess the buggy was a little too tall and the leash was a little too short, and that didn't make out for a good combination, and he died. I guess Ed had bred these dogs for several years, line breeding and so on and so forth, and he had kind of got out of it, whether they lost interest or the dogs died out or whatever, but there was always somebody in the community that had dogs that went back to his line. That's kind of how Bill was. He had lost his Bill dog, his first Bill dog, and kindly was out of it. And neighbor up the road had his stock of dogs, and dog had pups underneath a house. And he told Ed, he said, "Why don't you come up here and pick you one out?" And Ed went up there one day and crawled underneath the house and grabbed a pup, brought him home, and that was the second Bill. So that's how he got back into it. He had been out of dogs a couple of times, that he just lost his line and got it back that way, just from family and friends in the community.
Any idea if they look the same? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Just
Uh,
curious what the original, the OG Bill looked like. Since it is a podcast, of course, I always try to share pictures on social media, but in case somebody's not on social media or following us like they should be, what did Bill look like? Can you paint a picture of him?
oh, Bill was a stocky dog, kind of broad chested, had stand up ears, black and white, and had just a little tan on his cheeks. Pretty good looking dog, and I guess for the most part, people today would look and say that's a mountain feist. So that he had the mountain feist look about him.
How did he hunt?
They said he wasn't flashy. Said he didn't, he wasn't a deep and lonely type of dog. He just made it look easy. He just got under a squirrel and real often, and then he might be lollygagging. Next thing you know, you hear him open up and he's got a squirrel. He wasn't much for leaving trees. He was pretty much a one bark tree dog. Call him on one bark and he'd be there. I guess hunting style would be not like what most people want today.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a little bit different than what we're used to looking for today.
And you just make a good pleasure dog, but good pleasure dogs make good competition dogs. So he had his a good run in the competition side as well. He ended up with reserve world champion at Elnor Outdoor Club with National Current Feist Breeder Association World Hunt. And back then, when he won, they'd cut it off at 150 dogs. They was having close to 100 about every year. And back then, they took the top three dogs out of the first round to go back to the second round. They didn't. It wasn't full elimination. It wasn't work your way down. It was who's got the biggest score in the morning. The top three dogs go back out. So he done really well there.
Well, before we jump too far ahead into the later years, how did they discover that Bill was going to be a squirrel dog?
Well, Bill would follow Jason and Delmer. They were brothers. They were Ed's sons, and they worked at a sawmill. And they would follow them down when they went to work. Just kind of hung out with them and waited for them to go home. And he just got to treeing around the edge of the woods there at the sawmill. Sometimes they'd go to them. Sometimes they wouldn't. They didn't. They were coon hunting. They really didn't care much about a squirrel dog. And so that's how Bill, I guess, got started. And once he got started, Ed would load him up in a buggy and take off and go hunting him. And said a lot of times Bill would just pile off the buggy and take off. And time he got the horse stopped and got off, he'd be treed and go over there and shoot squirrel out. Kind of like road hunting, like people do now. So,
Well, in time frame wise, this was in the 90s. For a chunk of the 90s, I was still wearing diapers. So, is this a time period when coon hides were still high? Is that why Jason wanted a coon dog more than a squirrel dog, or did he just prefer coon hunting, or do we know?
I'm not real sure. I that was before my time in tree dogs, so I don't know when the prices took a drop. That'd be a good question. I don't know.
Maybe somebody can comment and tell us that. It seems like I don't know. I want to say for sure in the 80s maybe coon hides were high. That's when you heard, and maybe before then, obviously before then too, in the 20s and all that. But recent history, I guess people still alive enough to listen to a podcast. So then there was a sale from one Ed to another Ed of Bill.
Yeah, Ed Wilder, he lives up in Indiana too, and Ed would go down to Elnor and he seen dogs and he had heard about Bill, and I'm not sure if, and I'm sure he did. He knew Jason and Ed Wilder, or Ed Wagler before then. So he got to inquiring and ended up buying him. Ed Wilder's kennel name was Poor Fork. That's what happened with the name Poor Fork Bill. And that's why I guess Boggs Creek and Poor Fork really go hand in hand. Because I mean they come by their success with the same dogs basically. If you ever drive up around Lagodi going to Elnor, I know a lot of people go up to that hunt. If you'll in between Lagodi and Elnor, if you'll look, you'll see Boggs Creek and Poor Fork, and Poor Fork's a creek too. So that's kind of where they got their names at. And I noticed that one day driving up. I'm like, well, now I know where they got their names from.
Right.
That was pretty interesting, when I noticed that driving up
One of
one
them light
time.
bulb moments.
Right. So Ed Wilder had bought Bill, and he still got Jason to handle for him in the hunts. Well, let me back up just a little bit. Before they sold Bill, they decided to go up. Jason had heard about the hunts up at Elnor, and he got to reading the rules and decided he was going to take Bill up there just to see how he done. They didn't have a collar or nothing. They just had a baler twine they put around his neck, and that was the leash and the collar and all. And they'd turn him loose, and no tracking collars, no nothing back then. They didn't use them,
That gives me the
and
heebie-jeebies.
and he got to winning a couple of hunts, and he won that first one he took him in. He's like, "Well, I must have a squirrel dog. I think it's ready for him to have a collar," and that's when they got him a collar. Fast forward a little bit, Ed Wilder ended up buying him and still got Jason to handle for him and ended up getting reserve world champion up there at Elnora. And I guess that was the start of the fame process. He decided to, breed him a few times. And, the first cross I made with him was with a little dog called Cricket, Boggs Creek Cricket, who Ed Wilder had went down to Wade Baldwin and bought a little dog. Of course, the Baldwin Feist over at Eastern Kentucky, part of the Mountain Feist. Brought it back and bred that to Bill. In their first litter, they had 3 pups, and that's Rooster and Trouble and Sugar. I believe it was Sugar won the world hunt up there at Elnora. So reserve world champion produced a world champion. So that was pretty interesting, and then they had a few other crosses.
And is that the National Current Feist Breeders Association world you're talking about, or was there 2
Yes.
reserve worlds?
No, the National Current Feist Breeder Association World Hunt.
Okay, so this was the 150 dog hunt that the Amish dog with the twine collar leash just
Yeah,
went up
yeah.
there and smoked 148 of them anyway, we'll say.
That used to be the NKC World Hunt,
Right.
and it was a big one.
Yeah, I can't imagine pulling up and seeing 150 dogs at a hunt. That's pretty cool.
I'd love to see that in the squirrel dogs again.
It's like I always told you that I was born 15 years too late.
But yeah, I mean, it's they've made cur crosses. Another big cross that they made was Poor Fork Hobie. Hobie was a cur dog. They crossed him and had, some good luck out of those dogs. They throwed a bird dog or 2 in there, and it didn't take them long to figure out we're not doing that. I talked to Jason and them, and they said those never turned out, to do anything. They never made squirrel dogs.
And what was it they didn't like?
I don't know. They just said they didn't make it.
Just wasn't going to do it. So at this point, after Jason's success, when they start making these crosses, are they still making crosses for pleasure dog's sake, or meat on the table? We need something to eat, or have they been bitten by the competition bug with Bill's success, and are they breeding now to compete and stay in the competitions?
They're breeding for squirrel dogs.
Okay, so the competition is just always secondhand to them.
Yeah, of course, I wasn't around back then, and I don't know how much emphasis everybody put on, the competition side of it. I think that it was more, if you had a good squirrel dog, you went and showed your good squirrel dog off.
Yeah, it wasn't the focus of the kennel.
No, the focus was producing squirrel dogs.
Well, and kind of on that note, you were talking about the twine collar and the, leash, and that's all they had. It made me have a light bulb moment there. To me, I told you it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I just can't imagine going out to, I don't know, 100,000 acres of public ground or something, cutting a dog loose and not having that Garmin collar. I mean, when I got into it, we already had those, and I'm spoiled to it, and honestly, I can't imagine living without it. I'm not jealous of anybody that went up through the beep beep years. Good for y'all. I'm glad y'all survived, but I'm going to stick with my Garmin. But that being said, when my wife and I went on our honeymoon, we went to St. Lucia, and they drive like crap. I mean, their driving will terrify you. And my wife tells me that I'm a bad driver, and their driving still terrified me. And so I was teasing one of the tour guides, shuttle bus guys one time. I said, "Man, y'all don't know how to drive down here. Y'all scare the daylights out of us Americans." And he said, "Oh, no. In St. Lucia, we're all good drivers. All the bad ones are dead." And I thought, well, okay, yeah, I can go with that. So that twine collar comment kind of makes me think, if you could cut a dog loose with no collar, not tracking it, you just know. They knew when they took that off of Bill, he was going to fall treat somewhere. They didn't have to worry about him running off, chasing a deer, going to grandma's house next door and taking up in the pig pen and eating the slop. They didn't have to worry about those things. So I guess it kind of related that St. Lucia bad driver thing to me because it was survival of the fittest. You're at that point in time, a dog run off and got lost. It just got lost. It should have got treed. If it had got treed, it could have came home. So I don't know. I guess it kind of speaks to the dogs back then. Breeding for squirrel dogs and being able to just go show off a good squirrel dog. Because if you couldn't trust to cut the leash off that dog, then you wasn't gonna take him to a hunt to get him lost.
Well, I hunted my first squirrel dog for years without a Garmin, without a tracking collar. The first probably 4 years I hunted in competition and everything was without a collar. I got it now. I'm kind of like spoiled to it, but really, how much do we need them now?
Well, my little pup still needs one.
I mean, a shot collar maybe sometimes they get hard,
Yeah,
but I mean, I can't remember the last time I had one of my dogs that treed out a hearing that I couldn't have went and found him.
right.
And I think that's more what they were looking for was put food on the table
Hmm.
type of dog.
But if all the good dogs survived from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s without all that high tech stuff, maybe we only have good blood. All the bad blood got lost.
And one thing that really impressed me about the Boggs Creek line of dogs and stuff is the impact that it made on, I mean, still making on the Feist world. And it originated in an Amish community where a 10-mile buggy ride was a long way.
Hmm.
Now it stretches from, a lot of that blood's down in Mississippi, which there's a lot of it everywhere, but you're taking a little Amish community or it's actually a big Amish community up in Lagodi, Indiana, and it's made a big difference in dogs in Kentucky, Mississippi, Florida. You hear about these dogs all over the place. That always kind of stood out to me was really interesting.
Yeah, it is, and that's what these. I guess this is a kennel spotlight, not so much a breeder spotlight per se, but to me, that's what's so cool about having social media or podcast or whatever. Because like you said in the beginning, a lot of these older guys they don't want to come on a podcast and talk, which is fine. We want them to. Not going to make them or beg them. Um, if we don't get this digitized, if we don't get it out there where it can be downloaded 20 years from now, all that crap gets lost. 20 years from now, we may not even be on Facebook. We might be, I don't know, virtual holograms in each other's living rooms. I don't know what we'll be doing. But it is cool to me that dogs from such a long time ago continue to make that impact. And you get on those pages, like the Box Creek Poor Fork Facebook page, you get on that page and you still see people talking about, today, recent posts, Boggs Creek blood and still trying to find some of that old blood and how close to the old blood can we get to still want that blood, 35 years later, 30 years later or more? That's pretty cool.
You look back in Bill's time and some of the dogs I mentioned, Cricket from the Baldwin line. Back then, that was kind of unheard of. Ed Wilder had to make, I'm guessing today it would be a 6-hour drive. Back then that was before Mountain Parkway was developed in eastern Kentucky. So, back then it might have been a 10-hour drive because there was no straight shot to get over to eastern Kentucky. That was unheard of for people to go that far to get dogs. Most everything was line bred, was bred within small towns. The Grayson dogs in Grayson, Kentucky, the Baldwin dogs, Boggs Creek dogs up in Lagodi. So all the dogs that we are still talking about from 30 years ago were line bred dogs. Think about that. I think there's a lot of bloodlines, including mine, that was built on the backs of the Boggs Creek dogs, what Ed Wilder and Ed Wagler did.
And staying on crosses, like I told you before we hit record, dog named Turbo and a dog named Legend come up in searching. Are those dogs that you're familiar with? Were you in it yet at that time?
No, I've did a lot of research. See, both of those dogs are straight out of Bill. The Wallace brothers, Bob and Gary Wallace from over here, Paducah, Kentucky, ended up. They liked them so much they was breeding over a real small curved female, Wallace's Kentucky doe. I think she was about 17 and a half inches tall, 27, 28 pounds is what they were telling me. Of course, Gary and Bob hunted a lot with ATFA. Out of Doe and Legend and Turbo, they produced a lot of dogs that really made a good showing in ATFA. I think out of one litter there was, I believe, four Grand Squirrel champions in ATFA out of one of those litters, and they're still carrying that on, down there today.
So out of Bill, which I know we're talking, I mean, I got wrote down here that it was the early 90s, so that was what, 33 years ago. Out of Bill, would there be any dogs still running and gunning or studding in it today? I mean, how close to Bill do you think we can get right now?
Mm, I think there was a dog that was out of a real old dog that was one of the last pups produced that was breeding a couple of years ago. So maybe as close as a grand pup, but more likely it's probably great grand pups. For the most part of what's getting bred out there now. And there's still a few dogs up in Lagodi that some guys have that are pretty doubled up on Bill. They stayed true to Bill, but Bill was bred to a lot of different type of dogs. He was, and I'm not sure which ones made the best. I'd say you ask different people, you get different answers on what cross was the best. I believe, just looking at the record, I think that the Baldwin Cricket Dog was probably the best, just going by what they produced.
So Jason Wagler still in Indiana? Do we know?
Oh yeah, yeah. He lives right there, all in the same place. He's lived forever.
Still hunting squirrel dogs?
No, no, he's out of squirrel dogs. He has a business with pet dogs.
Okay.
Squirrel dogs don't sell for enough.
I don't know. I can only imagine 15-year-old me winning a world hunt, or I'm sorry, reserve champion on a world hunt with 150 dogs in it. You wouldn't fit my head in this room. I'd have been bit by the bug so hard, I don't think I ever would have got out of it. So I'm sure Jason's got a good reason why. But I mean, that's pretty cool though, pretty impressive. Just to come from farm stock and like you said, figured out that it worked and stayed true to it and kept breeding it and made a huge impact. Still making an impact because, like I said, people are still trying to get a piece of it, and it's still in your blood, your kennel. How far back in your kennel is it?
Oh, who, Bill?
Yeah, yeah. I guess it'd be Poor Fork at that point, wouldn't
Yeah, Bill on Junior. Bill would be in the fourth generation. Well, no, he's in the third generation. He's twice in the fourth generation and once in the third generation on Junior.
he? Well, Chad, to me, you know what? Out of all this, brief history that we've gone through here, dusting the cobwebs off of your 20-year-old conversations, what really stands out to me is Bill's, just the quality dog that he was. This was a dog that was given to an Amish man as a 14-week-old pup. They never really formally trained him. He, followed the boys back and forth to the sawmill and hung around and, did whatever dogs do at sawmills. And was never really formally trained. He just kind of ran loose and all of a sudden fell treat on a squirrel, and they decided, hey, maybe we'll hunt this dog. From there, a young Jason Wagler decided to put him into a competition hunt and won his first competition hunt with no collar and no real leash. And then he turned around with the same dog at a ripe age of 15 years old and got a reserve world champion. And the dog later became I guess if it was a second hunt, yeah, maybe he later became Grand Squirrel champion, NKC, all with a 15-year-old handler. And nothing against 15-year-old handlers, but to me it shows a lot of dedication and real squirrel dog attributes that just come out of a farm raised dog. A dog that continues to leave his mark on Feist breeds today just through consistent line breeding.
Yeah, and you look at dogs that's out there that go back to Bill, and you can, sitting down talking to Ed Wilder and Ed Wagler, and when they describe Bill, even in my own kennel, I'm going, man, that sounds like my dogs. I think when you line breed, real heavy, and yeah, they outcross Bill a lot, but Bill himself was line bred. I mean, once you build up those genetics and I don't know, concentrate them. No matter what you breed to, those genetics will come through. It's been done like that in every other breed, and you can really tell it. The LU, bird dogs, Kemmer curs, all those dogs that were real heavy line bred, you can make the outcross and still gonna get the traits of the dog that's been heavily line bred. So
Yeah, and one conversation you and I have had several times before the podcast and probably off the microphone since the podcast is what we view as the importance of line breeding. People, there's a group of people, a gaggle of people out there that say a Feist is just a mixed up dog. I think you can make that argument about any breed of dog. I don't think God created the cur. God didn't create the German Shepherd. God didn't create the Labrador Retriever, So I think you could say that about any kind of dog. People have been mixing up dogs since we've had dogs. But to me, the importance of line breeding is if you're really going to go for a purebred line of dogs, you have to start somewhere. The German Shepherd started somewhere. The poodle started somewhere, And maybe I'm making a weak argument by saying every dog is mixed up, but it is, weak argument or not, it's a fact. If you're a cur guy, if you're a blue tick guy, black and tan guy, feist guy, whatever kind of dog you're into, if you don't line breed, then you can't ever really protect those traits of that dog that you're going for. You mentioned Bill would have met mountain feist standards, looked like a mountain, what people would consider a mountain feist today. If they didn't stick to that with Bill, if they crossed Bill over a lab or a Dalmatian or whatever, and then they ran with that dog, and then they crossed that one over another breed of dog, you're still just mixing that blood up, and you're not really protecting, you're not preserving the attributes that Bill had that made him such a fine dog. So, and I'm not against anybody that wants to breed out. I mean, their dog is their dog. I don't think bad about those people, but I am a Feist believer, and to me, if you don't take the line breeding seriously, how do you ever? The Feist will never be a purebred recognized dog if you don't recognize breeding Feist to Feist, I guess is the point I'm making.
2 points, I guess I'll say on that is, one, if you outcross all the time, yes, you can get a world beater. Those genetics, created a super dog. That can happen. You have a litter of 8 pups, you got one superstar and 7 duds. That's more likely to happen on an outcross than line breeding. Line breeding, you're not necessarily going to get that world beater. You're not necessarily going to get the superstar. But out of 8 pups, you'll probably get 8 squirrel dogs.
Exactly.
So, that's point one. And point two, I do talk to a lot of people, and I guess I'm getting off subject a little bit, but I do talk a lot of people on the Feist being a breed and stuff, and it's the same old argument every time as a Feist is not a breed. Well, most of the time I tell those people that when your best Feist female comes in heat, do you turn her out of the kennel, let her get bred to whatever's in the neighborhood, keep the pups and hunt them, or do you put some thought into what you're going to breed to? I've never had anybody say, "Yeah, I just turned mine loose." Everybody says, "No, I put some thought into it." Well, if you're putting that much thought into it, why are you running your breed of dogs down just to call them a mutt? Too much planning goes into it, and there's a lot of good dogs out there because of it. Need to look at I guess, the effort that's been put into these dogs to get them where they're at.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I mean, standards are standards for that reason. And I say that because so many people before have put their effort into breeding Feist and trying to preserve and replicate traits out of dogs like Bill. They put their effort into it and concentrated on those attributes so much that, people like the UKC have come out and said, well, maybe this is a breed, And like I said, I don't know. I didn't research it because I didn't know we were going to go here on this episode. But if you go back on any of those breeds before they were recognized, they were crossed in something, Something was mixed in there to make it, and then once they made it, all those people put their effort into replicating it.
Yeah, and if you back up to what we're talking about here, the Bill's Day, and I wasn't hunting then, but a lot of accounts I've talked to people, and they brought their squirrel dog to a squirrel dog competition to see who had the better squirrel dog, the better put meat on the table dog. And the more we competition hunt, the more we kindly get away from that. Boy, we're getting way off the tracks on where we're going with this, aren't we?
We really are.
But yeah, I think we got to get back to the older ways of breeding these dogs for the meat portion of it, the pleasure hunt portion of it.
That is an excellent point. Excellent place to stop it. We might have been a bit all over the place on Bill, but Bill's one of those dogs. He hunted and lived at a time before it was so easy to go on Facebook and type in Bill and see every competition that he had been in and won that last weekend. It's always I love talking about these older dogs and the imprint they leave, but it's always hard for me on the back end of the show, trying to get my head around the dog or the handler that we're talking about. And Bill's definitely been one of those dogs, just because it was so long ago. And I mean, and you're talking about a community that is not on Facebook, they're not on the internet. So he was tough to research. Glad that we had him. I certainly am, because I do have your dogs. I enjoy them. So I'm glad that we had him. I'm glad that he was here. I'm glad that Ed and Jason hunted him. So to y'all listening, if you're still here with us, of course, on our page, we always put up the new episodes. So maybe if you've got something you could add to us from Boggs Creek, jump into that comment section and tell us all about your Poor Fork and Boggs Creek. Whether you've got a dog out of him, you got a dog close to him. Let us know what you think. If we left something out, educate us. But I've enjoyed it. It's been a good walk through time.
Yeah, it has, and we're working on some other guys. So I guess I'm going to say older lines. I like to say that I have a line of dogs, but it's a very new line compared to some of the guys out there.
Yeah, that this type of episode is one reason that I really even wanted to do this podcast. So this is the stuff I like. If I've got anything to do with it, of course I can't make the guys get on a microphone or on a phone call, I should say. But I'm certainly going to get out there and ask them. This is the stuff that I enjoy, and this is what I think the community needs. So yeah, definitely hang with us. We've already reached out to a couple of guys and waiting to hear back from some others. And hang with us. We've got some good ones coming. Hope y'all have enjoyed this one, but I think it's that time to go out and feed dogs.
Sounds good. Well, y'all have a good evening, and thanks for listening.
All right. Thanks for your insight, Chad.